Feliz Navidad, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year from Kiss.
Feliz Navidad, Happy New Year, Merry Christmas from Kiss.
Ho, ho, ho! I'm wishing everybody a really Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year.
Someone stole Santa? That does not rock!
What's going on, vinyl community? Welcome to another episode of 25 Days of KISSmas, where every day leading up to KISSmas, I will be reviewing and discussing every Kiss studio album plus more. For the 23rd episode, I will be reviewing the Sonic Boom album from 2009. With tensions brewing within the band, the original lineup embarked on a farewell tour in 2000 that never properly ended, and due to failed contract negotiations with Peter, Eric Singer was brought into the band wearing the Catman makeup in 2001, which breathed a bit of fresh life into the band. 2002 rolls around, and Ace at this point had enough, so Tommy Thayer was brought into the fold donning the Spaceman makeup, and Kiss received a new lease on life, which kind of contradicts the initial farewell statements, thus the rewriting of Kisstory in the first farewell tour being a farewell to the original lineup, but I digress. Upon Aerosmith's management requesting 3 original members for a co-headline tour in 2003, Peter was brought back into the fold, which also involved a stint in participating in the Kiss Symphony Alive 4 project. Before we continue further into Kisstory and the build-up to Sonic Boom, it's worth mentioning that around this time, Kiss had also contributed a cover on a Ramones tribute album called We're a Happy Family, and it also appeared as a bonus track on the single disc edition of Kiss Symphony Alive 4, which was Do You Remember Rock and Roll Radio? This track first appeared on the Phil Spector-produced Ramones album End of the Century. It was given that extra Kiss flair, but remained true to the original arrangement with a saxophone part played by Scott Page. Gene, Paul, and Eric appeared on the track along with keyboardist Derek Sherinian, who actually played keyboards side stage for Kiss during the Revenge tour. Peter's contract wasn't renewed in 2004, and Eric Singer became his replacement, and this fresh lineup went out on the Rock the Nation tour, and that was followed with a period of small tours and one-off shows for the next couple of years. A loophole in Kiss's catalog licensing agreements allowed them to re-record a selection of their greatest hits in 2007, which was first released in Japan in 2008 under the title Jigoku Retsuden, translation, Intense Transmission from Hell. Paul was always adamant that the fans were only concerned with hearing the classic material, but following a break from the Alive 35 tour in 2009, the reinvigoration from the re-recording sessions must have gave the hint that this lineup could stand the test of time, recording original material for the first time in 11 years since the release of 1998's Psycho Circus, the longest gap in between studio releases. The band struck an exclusive deal with Walmart to distribute the album, packaged with the re-recordings and footage from the band's recent South American tour, and in essence, Sonic Boom was a firm reminder of what Kiss was all about, and they delivered an album that was true to the Kiss name. So let's dig into the album. Side 1, Track 1, Modern Day Delilah. This album opener, written by Paul, was the album's first single and reached as high as number 11 on the Billboard Airplay charts, and the music video featured the band as giants walking the streets of Detroit, with performance footage filmed at Cobo Hall, which the 2 shows Kiss performed there in 2009 were the last before it was torn down. It's a powerful track that conveys all the Kiss aesthetics, even down to the Ace-like guitar solo from Tommy, and went as far as to be a show opener the following year after its release. Track 2, Russian Roulette. This collab between Gene and Paul was actually the name of a Gene demo dating back to 1985, but the only similarities lie in just the title. Paul has stated a song such as this one was an attempt for Gene to rediscover what he calls classic Gene that can be found on the band's older material that most fans associate him with. Track 3, Never Enough. Tommy was responsible for the music, and Paul penned the lyrics about celebrating life and never getting enough out of it. This track was released as the album's final single, reaching number 30 on the Heritage Rock charts, and despite this charting, it was never performed live by the band, and it goes without mentioning that this song sounds quite too similar to Poison's Ain't Nothing But a Good Time. Track 4, Yes I Know, Nobody's Perfect. Similar to Russian Roulette, this Gene track recycles the title of another Gene demo from around the Asylum era. This song captures the feel that can be found on older classic Gene tracks such as Ladies Room and Plastercaster. Track 5, Stand. This track by Gene and Paul features the classic trademark sort of trade-off vocals between the two of them, an anthemic chorus, and a great harmony-driven middle break. The arrangement of the song and its various parts almost reminds me at moments of God Gave Rock and Roll to You structure-wise. Coupled with lyrics about friendship and standing by one side, it is hands down perhaps the highlight off of the album. Now we're going to flip the album over to Side 2, Track 6, Hot and Cold. This track from Gene has him touching back into his past since this song recycles a bit from one of his 70s era demos called Rotten to the Core. Track 7, All for the Glory. Eric has his proper lead vocal debut on a Kiss studio album with this track written by Gene and Paul. Originally, the intent for Eric's vocal spotlight on this album was to be of a song that Paul had demoed in the late 80s that Eric actually played on, which was a bit softer in comparison, similarly in the vein of Hard Luck Woman. Despite co-producer Greg Collins liking this track, the fact that the song co-credited an outside writer automatically vetoed its inclusion on the album, given the band's insistent no outside writers stance on this record. Overall, this is a solid Kiss anthem that conveys the usual message of all for one, one for all. Track 8, Dangerous. This song written by Paul riff-wise has a similar swagger to Deuce, and it was the first song written and recorded for the album. Track 9, I'm an Animal. This song actually has a bit of an interesting history to it. The nucleus of the song stems back to a Gene demo from the early 80s called Feels Like Heaven, which has a slight disco tinge to it that Peter Criss actually recorded for his Let Me Rock You album. Some of the lyrics were retained, and Paul and Tommy infused some fresh ideas to it, and the end result is a dark song that very much serves as the demon track on the album, ending with a scream that is reminiscent to the one hears at the end of Unholy. This was another song from the album that lasted in the live set for roughly a year. Track 10, When Lightning Strikes. Here we have Tommy's lead vocal debut on a Kiss album. He is responsible for the initial idea for the song, and then Paul fine-tuned it to make it fit into the Kiss mold. Now look at the context of the original four. Each member were able to sing lead on a given track, with Gene and Paul taking the lion's share of vocal duties, and Eric having sung lead during his first tenure with the band. So Gene and Paul advocated for Tommy to sing lead, and he knocked it out of the park on this track. Tommy wrote in the perspective of the spaceman persona that he obviously portrays, with the spacey, lightning thematic nature of the song's lyrics. Track 11, Say Yeah. This track written by Paul was the second single released from the album and can be a solid summation on the ideology of not wasting precious time. It's an absolute anthem of a song with a huge sounding chorus, which obviously translated well on the live stage, where it lasted longer than the other songs represented on this album since it allowed for audience participation. As for where this album stands in my Kiss catalog ranking, I would put Sonic Boom at the number 11 spot. And how ironic, because in my opinion, the 11-year gap between studio albums was well worth it with this record. One thing I personally don't understand is that people dock this album for it sounding too derivative of albums like Rock and Roll Over and Love Gun. And sure, the band was aiming to go for that kind of sound, but it's those older albums that made Kiss so great, and they already know what their classic sound is, so there is really no need for Kiss to go left field or tap into something new. This album has all the trappings and aesthetics to classic Kiss tracks to please any old school fan, so what's there not to love? Just to add a small footnote to wrap this review up, it's worth mentioning that around 2010, Kiss had contributed a track to the Paul McCartney tribute album, The Art of McCartney, which ended up being released in 2014. The track was Venus and Mars / Rock Show. This opening segment of the track, which is titled after the album it appears and opens, is a nice acoustic-driven piece which Gene sings lead on, very fitting given his melodic Beatles influence, and then it transitions into the bombast of Rock Show, which Paul sings lead on. It's kind of more appropriate to label this as a Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley contribution than a Kiss contribution, since those are the only two members of the band that appear on this track, since the instrumental backing track was actually done by Paul McCartney's touring band. But hey, if it's Gene and Paul, it's still practically Kiss. This rendition is merely identical to the original arrangement with no radical changes. So there you guys go. That is the 23rd episode of the 25 Days of KISSmas series. Stay tuned tomorrow for the 24th episode, and you can already guess what comes next. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead, give it a like, and subscribe to the channel. See you guys in the next video, and most importantly, keep the records spinning. And children listen to hear sleigh